China suffered from haze disaster, and the people are patient in adversity. People in Chengdu, wearing masks, sat in the street to protest and laugh at themselves. The police chased them away, and even arrested the leaders into the police station. The crowd simply cursed and dispersed, went back home to surf the internet and scolded the public, and then the posts were deleted. Some people continue to post, continue to scold, everything like the story argue of Luke Xun, the pig to bully me, which day to see me overthrow the pig. The next day, the same drama was staged repeat again. Jack Ma made a speech, saying that China was finally fair, and that the top leader breathes the same haze as ordinary people. The internet feedbacks exploded, saying that even social moguls such as Jack Ma had voicing their voices, and the Chinese people are going to rise up. Alibaba said it wanted to develop Hangzhou into the world's platform economic center. The G20 Global Conference was held in Hangzhou. During the holding of the G20 in Hangzhou, Hangzhou became a ghost city, and residents were sent to travel to other places. And kitchen knives were not allowed to be sold in any supermarket. The windows of residential buildings along the street have been sealed. And every floor of the hotel and guest house in Zhejiang province has been equipped with armed police. Foreign guests into the door by the public security police on behalf to swipe card into their rooms. Such the situation as battle. Will Hangzhou become an international business center? I am afraid only Luke Xun Zhaoqiu would believe it. The point here is, what is wrong with you, Chinese? In any Western country, or even in those countries on the periphery, if people wear masks to protest against haze, and once they could be arrested, all people would rush into government buildings to turn over tables and smash cabinets. However, the Chinese people are willing to do nothing but be an electronic IQ, and the most daring one to scold the government on the internet, another timid ones to scold the United States, and the worst cowardly one to turn over the Great Firewall and then scold Taiwan. The days went by like this. When the haze disappeared in summer, the horses run again and people dance again. The money would be deceived again and people would be bullied again, and the next winter haze would repeat the same drama again and again. Some people say that this is obedience, some say that this is servility. This has been said for 100 years. Actually, there's no interest to say it again. Luke Xun had already asked the question 100 years ago. But why have the Chinese not made much progress over the past 100 years? Why no more progress even if they got the doctorates in overseas studies? Blame the Communist Party. Blame the Kuomintang. Blame the old lady Sixie. If you listen patiently, I can blame you all the way from the Emperor Qin Shi Huang, Han Feizi, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and even to the Buddha of India. Do you believe it? The key question is whether you are a human or not. How old do you have to live to be responsible for yourself? Chinese, are you still human? Blame yourself, ask yourself, how about your own inner self-image? I can tell you for sure. If you can bear wearing a mask and are suspected of being dissatisfied with the government, accepting government handouts to travel to outside towns in order to preserve the image of the city to foreigners, or due to the little girl singing at the Olympics had protruding teeth, she has to be replaced by another pretty girl to lip-sync for her voice, or painted the whole mountain green in order to make her political achievements for greening, or refitted an old Ukrainian aircraft carrier and claimed to have entered the aircraft carrier nations, and concentrate on making money without seeing the costs of rural destitute households, urban migrant workers, and the environment. Like the IQ, when you are exposed under the fake name of Uncle Zhao, you turn around and look down on others. So, the fundamental problem with you is the inner image you are running away from, the sense of worst you feel you are unworthy of being a civilized person. Carrying money most based on many poor people supported and often ill-gotten in your pocket. And enjoy the act of others pretending to satisfy your inferiority complex because of your money. If you can live with it all, then you must have a problem with your self-image. This is not the case with a small number of Chinese. If there were no such a small number of Chinese, China would not have those once brilliant civilizations. But if you are one of those few, I think you may feel so sorrow for the majority of the Chinese people. Here, do a simple math calculation with most of the Chinese people. China now has a population of 1.4 billion, 1% of whom are 14 million. 14 million, do you know what that concept is? There are 170 countries on this planet with fewer than 14 million people. That is to say, if China's tallest 14 million people stand out in front of these 170 countries, it would be equal a giant nation. If China's richest 14 million people stand out in front of the 170 countries, it would be the huge rich country. Or the most pretty 14 million Chinese stand out. It would be a country of fully handsome men and beautiful women. And the most civilized and courteous 14 million people, in the eyes of other 170 countries, it would be the great country of civilization. Yes, by such standards, China has already risen up in the world. However, the coin has two sides. If the shortest 14 million people in China stand out as a dwarf's nation in front of the same 170 countries, or the poorest 14 million people stand out, and the people of those 170 countries will shed tears at the sight of it. If 14 million of the ugliest people sat on the stage, and the citizens of those 170 countries were transformed into beautiful men and women in an instant, and the most rudest of the 14 million would have allowed 170 countries to judge China as a backward village. Do you know what this means? Big is China's strengths, but also China's weaknesses. China cannot just look at its strengths and close its eyes to its weaknesses. Don't forget, even IQ, he has still many advantages. Whenever China wants to prove to the world that it has risen, it does its best coming to the world in second place in terms of total GDP. But forgetting that its per capita GDP is the 76th in the world. Of the top 75 countries that are stronger than China, the Chinese remember no more than 5 countries. There was no concept in statistics of GDP in the Qing dynasty. If the Emperor Kangxi had known that its GDP accounted for nearly half of the earth, then I am afraid the Qing dynasty would have perished more quickly. Has the People's Republic of China risen up? I said yes. If you look at the total GDP and the total amount of fighters, tanks, and missiles. But I could also say no. In terms of per capita GDP and the quality of civilization. From which point of view, it is the freedom of every Chinese. The conclusion is made by yourself, the decision is made by yourself, as long as you paid after you lose a bet. What we're afraid is, willing to gamble, but no willing to lose, as long as the wager is willing to lose. Anyone be defeated can rise again. If the wager not admit to lose, anyone with gold mountain will be consumed. In modern China, there are 2 cases in which of the wagers not admit to lose. One is the IQ described by Luke Xun, who is familiar to Chinese people, and the other is the Boxer Rebellion. Do Chinese people have no ambition? Are they born too afraid to wear masks to prevent AIDS? Of course not. Although there is IQ in Luke Xun's works, there is also the camel's Yangtze in Lao Shi's pen. The Yangtze was ambitious, did not eat the girl's soft rice, and lived on his own, but under the social system he bowed his head and became a normal Chinese. Writing Yangtze's Lao Shi eventually became a normal Chinese too. And finally put his body silently into the Wei Ming Lake of Peking University, leaving his soul on the shoes of the shore. Suddenly, I have a strange idea. If IQ was put as captain of the Liaoning aircraft carrier which sailed around Taiwan, and the Yangtze's rickshaw and the pair of shoes which Lao Shi had left on the shore after jumping into the lake, and put them all in the captain's room of the Liaoning, what would it be like to encounter one of the American aircraft carriers, which coming from San Diego? Are there any ghosts in the world? If a bunch of the Boxer Rebellion were allowed to regenerate and were allowed to dance in front of the Taipei 101 building in Taiwan, what would it be like? Would it be more mature when the older ghosts compare to 100 years ago? Besides the self-image of inferior civilization, it is difficult to explain a lot of phenomena. Why such a large group of people, unable to exploit the strengths of their own civilization, but to highlight its weaknesses to prove that their shortcomings are not weaknesses? How can this problem be inherited from a 70-year-old man to a 17-year-old youth? Why even wearing a mask to prevent haze would feel guilty or treason? Why this? Why that? Besides the self-image of inferior civilization of the inner being which thinks oneself is unworthy of a decent human being on earth. Who can offer any other more reasonable explanation? Can you say that China can rise under the self-image of inferior civilization? I am talking about the rise of 1.4 billion people, not the 14 million people rise from 1%. If we only look at the ratio of 1%, every nation on the planet can justifiably call itself a rising power. 1% of the rising Chinese, whether your 1% status is born natural with or acquired by the day after, you all have the responsibility. You have the responsibility to remind the IQ people can no longer as IQ. You have the responsibility to let the youngs live a life as normal. You have the responsibility to make today's Lao Shi do not need to jump into the lake to save his soul. You have the responsibility to make people wear masks to prevent haze without feeling of treason. You have the responsibility to lead 99% of the Chinese people out of that self-image of inferior civilization. Yeah, it's you, if you think you're the man in that 1%.